I came into possession of a very small reel of 8mm film, and the only thing it said on it was Air Force jets. I had assumed it was going to be jets from the United States, but upon inspection, the first jet that I saw was actually a British bomber of the V series, so I was intrigued. The V bombers were the Royal Air Force's strategic nuclear strike force. This footage is dated 1957. When this video was taken, the Vulcan had only been in service for 1 year, and the Valiant for 2. It looks like there's 2 Vulcans and 2 Valiants. Now all of a sudden I'm seeing American bombers. These are B-47 StratoJets. What am I looking at here? After doing some simple searches with American and British bombers together, I came across an article that said in 1957 there was an Air Force base that was going to be hosting a competition between medium and heavy bombers. It was the annual Strategic Air Command Bombing, Navigation, and Reconnaissance Competition. How cool is it to see all these B-47s lined up and the British bombers, all operational and in their prime? In December of 1953, the 321st Bombardment Wing was activated at Pinecastle Air Force Base, which was then renamed to McCoy Air Force Base. It was named after Colonel Michael McCoy, previously commander of the 306th Bombardment Wing at MacDill. He was appointed the commander of the 321st Bombardment Wing on May 24, 1954. In November of 57, the 321st in Pinecastle were to be hosting the medium bombers participating in the annual Strategic Air Command Bombing, Navigation, and Reconnaissance Competition. In October, prior to the competition, a B-47 crashed, and it took the lives of Colonel McCoy, Captain John Woodroffe of the Royal Air Force, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Joyce, and Major Vernon. In May of 1958, Pinecastle was renamed McCoy Air Force Base in memory of the late Colonel McCoy. Orlando International Airport sits on the site of the old McCoy Air Force Base and actually still bears the letters MCO as its designation. The competition didn't take place until November. This video was taken in October of 1957, and while I can't prove it, I have a suspicion that this video might have been taken the day of the fatal crash. Here's an image I found of the debris field. It's the only actual photo I was able to find of the crash itself, and this is the area north of Orlando where the crash actually happened. While the official cause of the crash is still disputed, some listing it as pilot error, others listing it as structural failure of the jet, what's not disputed is the tragedy of the loss of these 4 brave men. Colonel McCoy was a decorated World War II pilot, flying the B-52 Stratofortress. He flew for the 315th Bomb Group, based in Guam. He flew 22 missions over Japan. Colonel McCoy's death came on his 52nd birthday. He had been flying for 3 decades and had logged more than 20,000 hours in the cockpit. He was among the first trained to fly the B-47s, and he had set performance records in the bomber. Another pilot was quoted as saying, "He was the best pilot I ever knew. The plane just got away from him." Captain John Woodroffe of the RAF was another decorated World War II bomber pilot, having received a Distinguished Flying Cross. This is an excerpt from the London Gazette from September of 1944. Wing Commander Woodroffe has now completed 45 successful operational sorties, including attacks on some of the most heavily defended targets in Germany, such as Berlin, Essen, Leipzig, and Bremen. It goes on to say, there is in fact probably no officer in Bomber Command who, as far as his own individual efforts are concerned, more credit is due for the successes achieved during the past 6 months than Wing Commander Woodroffe. He has undoubtedly earned for himself the highest recognition. I therefore recommend him in the strongest possible terms for immediate appointment to the Distinguished Service Order. In 1955, he assumed command of the Royal Air Force Wittering Station, where a fleet of England's new jet bombers, the Valiants, were operated. 2 years later, on a career path for a top rank in the RAF, he flew to Pinecastle to oversee 4 British jets participating in an annual Strategic Air Command bombing competition. 4 British jets. Here again we see 2 Vulcans and 2 Valiants. This is definitely footage of, if not that fateful day, then certainly that week. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Joyce was the operations director for the 321st Bomb Wing. He also piloted B-29s during the Second World War. During his last mission over Japan, enemy fire shot out 2 of his 4 engines, but he managed to fly the crippled plane back to his base on Iwo Jima. He also flew repeated missions over the hump of the dangerous mountain terrain to ferry supplies from India to China in the CBI theater of battle. Major Vernon Dale Stuff from California was the navigator on the fateful flight. As you could see from his headstone, he was another decorated hero of World War II, having flown 27 combat missions over Italy. The B-47 never saw major combat, yet 464 crewmen died in crashes between 1951 and 1966, according to the book Boeing's B-47 Stratojet. Most died during training. The deadliest year, though, was 1957. By October 9th, the date of this crash, funerals had already been held for 40 crewmen. Before lunch, another 4 would perish in Orlando, Florida. "It gave you a sense of power you never felt before," said a retired B-47 pilot, but the margins were so slight between being a really hot pilot and having a disaster. In level flight and fully loaded, an inattentive pilot could accelerate the bomber until it ripped itself apart. No prop plane could do that. High speeds could also flex the wings so wildly that the pilot would lose control. He says, if you relax for a minute, it would turn around and bite you. The B-47's mission was to deliver nuclear payload to the Soviet Union. To do this job, the plane was given swept wings and jet engines, a first for an American bomber. The B-47 was a hybrid of World War II era construction techniques and aerodynamic theory that was sometimes inadequate for the new era of jet engines. The Stratojet was the perfect strategic weapon for its time. It was so feared by its enemies that the bomber never had to perform its lethal nuclear mission. Sadly, though, the plane also suffered tremendous losses that would be intolerable by today's standards. By the late 50s, the B-47 fleet received modifications to address structural fatigue. But by 1960, the B-47 phase-out had already started, making room for the new B-52. For a time, the B-47's high performance and outstanding crews provided the United States with an overwhelming strategic advantage, but the experience was a sobering one. Strategic Air Command learned from it, and it vastly improved training and flying safety procedures, as the B-52 quickly became the Air Force's principal nuclear bomber. Over the operating history of the B-47, 203 aircraft were lost in crashes, with 464 deaths. This represents approximately 10% of the total number produced. The last recorded flight of a B-47 was in June of 1986, when a B-47E was restored to flight-worthy condition for a one-time ferry flight. This aircraft was flown from Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake in California to Castle Air Force Base. It's on display now at the Castle Air Force Base Air Museum. Of the 2,032 B-47s that were built, only 23 survive today, all of which are at air museums across the United States. This video is in honor of all the brave men who flew in the B-47s in defense of this country, especially the ones who gave their lives.